We're going to use AI vision to analyze and tag images today. And my example here is going to be having AI review advertisements to make sure that they follow rules and regulations, but we're also going to extract information about what's going on in the photo. So scrape any text from the photo, do some basic checks on the content, that sort of thing. I'm intentionally having it do things that are fairly difficult just to give you an idea of how much it can handle. So here's the example we're going to work with. I'm going to upload this, give it some time to run, and show you what it does with the file. I'm just going to drag and drop it into the library. And it does take about a minute only because the trigger is only checking for new files about once a minute. So we're going to fast forward and see what it attaches to this. So I'm using Power Automate here. I'm going to walk you through exactly how the flow works in a minute, but I want to show you what this did. So for our file that we uploaded here, we have the model that ran. So I'm using Claude Opus for this, and the language that the content was in, the tags were added to the file. So it's using AI vision to see what's going on in the picture. It's added a description of what was going on in the photo. This promotion field is asking it whether or not it is offering a cash bonus or sweepstakes. So it has tagged this as NA because the ad was offering popsicles, not cash. It's extracted the disclaimer text from the advertisement, the call to action, given it an accessibility score. So this is out of 10, where 10 is good, 1 is bad. Some suggestions for how to make it more accessible. So increase the font size of the disclaimer. The product type is particular to the list of products I was having it look for, and I didn't find either of those, which is correct. The AI is giving it a compliance score out of 10 also. So this is how compliant is it with rules and regulations in the US that apply here. So we're going to go through how to do this step by step. I want to give you a little bit of background info about how this works before we start. So I'm using Claude for this today for no particular reason. You could use any LLM that is capable of AI vision. So OpenAI would work too, so on and so forth. If you're trying to keep everything in the Microsoft ecosystem, you could use Azure OpenAI. My difficulty with Azure OpenAI is when I try and use the newer models on it, it makes you request resources via form for that. And that goes through an approval process. So I wasn't able to get the model that I wanted to use through Azure, but the cost of this is very low. So we're making one API call here. So that's a fraction of a cent. This will trigger Power Automate premium licensing, which runs about $15 a month. But if you are working in a development environment, say to make a POC first, that won't trigger the premium licensing. So you will only need the premium when you move it to production. The gist of this is that we are using the LLM to generate JSON, then we're parsing the JSON, and then we are putting that as metadata back on the file in SharePoint. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need to do this is a document library with your fields on it that you are wanting to work with. So in SharePoint, if you go to your site contents, which should be in the left sidebar or the gear menu up top, then go to the new menu in the toolbar up here and select document library. So I'm going to start with a blank library, call this whatever we like, and create. So now you're going to want to add your custom columns on here. Just click on add column in the view and add whatever you want. So I'm using a text column to store the model name of the AI version that is running on the file. A choice column for the tags. So the choice fields, if you make one called tags, check this box for can add values manually. So this is going to be what lets it add tags for things that aren't explicitly defined in the choice list. That's important because our AI is going to be coming up with our tags, right? And then also check the box for allow multiple selections, set that to yes. To save that. And then if you're trying to extract text from an image and you expect it to be longer than a few words, you're going to want to use the field type multiple lines of text for that. The character limit on just this single line of text up here is 255 characters. I kind of prefer, if you have true false fields, to use choice instead of yes, no, because the yes, no is a checkbox in the form, and setting it is kind of awkward in Power Automate too. So I usually just use choices of yes or no instead, but it's personal preference really. I used number type fields for the scoring just so that it would sort properly. And I think that's everything that is interesting here. When you're done adding your fields here, you're going to need to make sure you have an API key for the LLM that you're planning on using. For Claude, if you go to anthropic.com/API, there's an option to try Claude here, and that'll give you $5 worth of API credits I'm not affiliated with Anthropic at all. I just use this because they had a trial. Once you've signed up for a service, you need to generate yourself an API key. You can do that in the console. So if you go to console.anthropic.com, there's an option right on the homepage for get API keys. So you click on this and then you create yourself a key and store it somewhere very safe. You can only copy that key when it's generated. You can't come back and get it in here later. If for whatever reason you lose it, you can just create a new one. So once you have your API key, you are ready to create your Power Automate flow. So back over here, if I go to the Waffle Launcher and Power Automate in the launch menu, so in Power Automate, just go to the Create menu up top here, and we're going to create a new automated cloud flow. And for the trigger, search for the word file. So we're going to use this trigger when a file is created, properties only in SharePoint, and click Create. I want to point out here that we are dealing with an API key. And when you're dealing with API keys, it's not best practice to be storing your API key inside the flow. I'm going to do that in this video because I don't have Azure Key Vault in my development environment. So Azure Key Vault is the best place to be storing your API key. There is, if you are working with Power Automate solutions, an environment variable type for a secret. That'll let you select Azure Key Vault, put in your key there, and then you'll be able to reference it in your flow. So that's the best way to do this. I'm going to be putting mine in a compose action. Don't be me. Okay. So we need to configure this when a file is created to add in our SharePoint site. So I'm going to select mine and then select the library that you are wanting it to trigger on. I'm going to use the first one I demoed rather than the second one where I was showing how to add columns because that's where all of my fields are. I'm going to add a couple of compose actions next. So one of them is going to get our file extension on the file that's uploaded because you only want this to be running on your image files, right? You don't want it to be running on documents because the way that that would function is very different. I'm going to search for compose in here. There's a new option to favorite actions in the new Power Automate UI. So I'm going to favorite compose because I use compose all the time. So we're going to put an expression in here. I'm going to use the FX button. And what we're going to do is we're going to split on the period in the file name. So that's going to give us the string of the file extension. And then we're going to convert it to lowercase just so that all of the file extensions are all lowercase. Our function for this is going to be to lower. That gets it in lowercase, parentheses, last, parentheses, split, parentheses. And then we're going to go to the dynamic content panel over here. The new UI likes to collapse all of the fields under this See More option here. So you need to click See More to get them all to show up. And then just search in here for file name. So that's this file name with extension here. So click that. It'll insert it in the split. Then do a comma and the single quotes. It'll add 2 when you insert that. That's what you want. And then put a period between the single quotes. So what that's going to do is it's going to split on the period in the file name. So click Add and then rename this step so that you know what it's doing. So we're going to call that Get File Extension. I'm going to add one more compose here to put in my API key. Again, don't be me. Don't put your API key in here, but I don't have Azure Key Vault. So I'm going to do that for this tutorial. And I'm just going to paste it in here. I'm going to cut ahead so that you don't see my API key. But another option you have is under settings. There's this secure inputs toggle. So what that does is it doesn't surface the key in your outputs when you're going through and looking at like the flow history and stuff. So I'm going to turn that on. And it puts a little lock icon here. So next we need our condition. So our condition is going to check and see what that file extension was and only run our actions if they are an image type. Search for condition, add that. We're going to set this dropdown to or because we want to say if the file extension is PNG or JPG or JPEG, then do these things. So for our dynamic content here, we're going to add a few checks. So I'm going to use the lightning bolt icon. And we're going to use the output from our get file extension compose action. So that's this one here. We're going to say, is it equal to PNG? I'm going to add a few more rows for is it equal to this, that, or the other thing, following that same pattern. Use the same comparison here. And then you can rename this condition. So you can say if image. The Anthropic API also wants to know what type of image it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another couple checks to see if it's a PNG or a JPG. It uses this in the API call and sends that. So I'm going to actually make a variable to store this because I want to be able to reference the same variable and set it to different values under different conditions. Above our condition needs to be outside the condition. We're going to initialize a variable. That's this one here. I'm going to call this image type, and we're going to make this string type variable. So initialize creates the variable. Now we need to set the variable under different conditions. So under the true branch of the check of whether or not it's an image, we can do a switch statement that will do different things under different conditions. So this is a lot like the condition we just did. It's just that you get multiple cases to work with. So we're going to do the switch on and enter our file extension output here, because that's what we're looking at. And then we're going to add a case. So that's this little floating plus icon here next to default. So if it's equal to PNG, then we're going to add to that branch a set variable action. So we're going to select the variable we created earlier, the image type, and we're going to set it to image/PNG. So that's the ping type. We probably want to rename this case so that we know which one it is. So case PNG up here. And then we can do the same thing for the default action. So this branch, we do the same thing. So we use set variable. There's only two types of images here, JPEGs and PNGs. So we can use the default branch for the JPEGs. So this one, we're going to set the same variable to image/JPEG. All right, so I'm going to collapse this so that we don't have to look at it anymore because we've got that done. All we need in there is setting that one variable. The next thing we need to do is get the file content for the image. So this trigger only has information about the file, so the file metadata. It doesn't have the file content, so we need to get that file content. Under the true branch, not inside the switch, outside the switch, we're going to add an action for get file content. It's this one here under SharePoint. We're going to give it our site name and then give it the file identifier. So in SharePoint, there's both a file identifier and a file ID. They're not the same thing. So you can see this ID here, that's the list item ID. You don't want that one, okay? Search for identifier, this one. So we've got our content now. I'm going to add another compose action under that. Compose, and in this compose, I'm going to put our prompt. So you don't have to put the prompt in a compose action. I just feel like it's a lot easier to manage and edit later. So this is going to be the whole big long text of your prompt. I'm going to paste mine in. I'm going to put it in a blog post so that you can look at it, copy paste parts of it, whatever you want. First, I give it some context. So you are an expert at bank marketing compliance. You're reviewing advertisements, blah, blah, blah. Here's what you're doing, basically. When I send an image, look for the following things. So here's where you are defining your columns. These are going to match whatever you used in your library, whatever things you're asking it to do that you're going to store later. So I have it getting transcribed text, disclaimer text, image description. I'm not putting any spaces in these titles because we're going to parse them later, and this just makes it a little bit cleaner. For each of these, you probably want to give it some context on what that thing is that you're asking for. If it's relevant, give it a little bit of an example, or if there's specific values you want it to return, give it those specific values. Since I'm trying to get it to give information about the accessibility of the image, so is the font readable, is the contrast of the font good, that kind of thing. Specifically with the font size, it kind of struggles with this. Claude will sometimes refuse to tell you how big font is because it can't literally see it. It does seem to do a fairly decent job at measuring it if you ask it to measure the height of a letter. Since you know the height of your image, you can kind of infer whether or not that's large enough. It does a fairly good job at that itself, but sometimes it'll refuse to do it. So I'm being very explicit here in saying, don't refuse to do this. Like, I've seen you do it before. For the scores, give it your minimum and maximum value. We're going to provide an example below so it kind of gets an idea of what passing and failing is. The tags are interesting. So the way that we're asking it to do tags is to return it in key value pairs, and it needs to follow a specific format in the example below. This is going to be what lets us set the choice field when it has multiple values. Multi-value choice fields in SharePoint are a little bit finicky to work with in Power Automate, but let's go through the rest of our examples. So the example is important. I'm giving it two examples, one that is a good ad and one that's a bad ad, so that it kind of has an idea of what good and bad are. I feel like that makes those responses a little bit more balanced, but I haven't done extensive testing on that. So our example is JSON. We're asking the LLM to return JSON so that we can parse it. So what the parsing does is it gives us dynamic content cards for each of these fields. Then we can work with that in our flow. We can click on them, we can use them to set the file attributes, that kind of thing. What I actually did was I used used a chat-based LLM to generate the example for me, and then I edited that. So I said, hey, Claude, make me an example of JSON that contains these fields, and then I pasted in these things up here. That kind of speeds it up a little bit because it's kind of a pain to type out these JSON examples. But basically what you're looking for is curly brackets, your fields surrounded by double quotes, a colon, and then the value that you want it to return. Notably, if you're working with number type fields, like this one and this one, these are going on to number type fields in SharePoint. They do not have double quotes. So double quotes make something a string in JSON. If you're trying to get it to return a number, don't put it in double quotes. The tags go into an array. So again, I'm going to put this in a blog post if you want to look at it, copy paste parts of it, whatever. So next we need to send our prompt to Claude. I'm going to use an HTTP action here. This is where if you wanted to do a custom connector, you could, but it's much easier to demo with HTTP options. So I'm going to search for HTTP. So here's our HTTP. We're going to insert this. We're going to put in our URI here. So this is going to be the same for any API call to Anthropic messages. So it's https://api.anthropic.com/v1/messages. And for the method, we're going to select post because we are sending it. Then we need a few headers here. So for the first one, we're going to put in Anthropic version. If you're using OpenAI, it's going to have slightly different headers and a different URI. Okay, so look at the documentation if you're using a different LLM. Anthropic version is 2023-06-01. Our next header is going to be content type, and that's application/JSON. And I'm realizing that this is going behind my head. I'm actually going to move my video over here. Next is our X-API-key. This is our API key. If you are storing yours in an environment variable, you can select it in the lightning bolt icon. I have mine under this compose action. And then we scroll down to the body. So I'm going to paste this in here because it's really long. And if you typo even one part of it, it won't work. So I'm going to put this in a blog post. You can copy and paste it as long as you've used the same action names. It should just work when you paste it in. If it doesn't, just reinsert the dynamic content cards. So let's go through what this is doing. The model up here is where you can choose which model is being used. So I read somewhere that Opus was better at vision, so that's what I'm using. You can put the word latest after it, and it will always use the latest model. If you want it to be more consistent and use a specific model every time, you can hard code the exact model name in here. Give it the number of tokens it's allowed to use. So typically 1024 is the default, but if you want to have it use less, you can use less. Next is our messages. This is where we're sending it the image file and the prompt. So this media type right here is where we insert our variable from before, where it's inserting image/PNG or JPEG, depending on which image type it is. This is the file content. I had to convert it to base 64 with an expression to get this to work. I'll just retype it quick to give you an idea of how this works. So base 64, parentheses, and then select from the dynamic content your file content here and insert that. This is really weird because, and I think it's a modern UI thing, but when this runs, this base 64 expression disappears and only the file content card stays. It still works that way, but if you directly insert the file content from the dynamic content on its own, the flow fails and it says something about an invalid type error. And then the last part of this is our prompt. So here we just insert our image prompt from one of the steps above. So again, I keep it separate just because it's easier to type it in and see what's going on without having all of the brackets all over the place. At this point, it's a really good idea to save and test this. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to save and test. And the first time you run this, you're going to have to do manual. So we're going to do manually, and then we're going to upload the file to trigger the flow. And it sometimes takes like 30 seconds or so to go, but you'll see it updated here. Need to delete my example file to do this here. All right, we're uploading, maybe. All right, so I'm gonna upload our file and come back here and we're gonna wait for it to go. So our flow ran successfully. We're gonna check this HTTP step to make sure it's doing what we want. So just look at the outputs and check the content of the response to make sure that it looks like the JSON that you wanted it to create. So these \n's are normal. Those are line breaks. That looks good. We're ready to parse it. So let's go back and edit our flow. So what you can do for parse JSON to get the schema is to give an example and let it generate the schema for you. We happen to have an example already in our prompt. So remember, we gave the LLM an example to use when it generates the JSON. So theoretically, if it's following that example, the response should come out in the same way. I want to point out here that you need to be very careful that your JSON example is valid JSON first. So if you want to check it, and there's JSON validators online, or you could paste it into your LLM chatbot of choice and just ask it if it's valid or not. Because mine, it turns out, had one of the fields here had curly quotes instead of straight quotes. I don't know how those got in there, but those will break your JSON. Just pointing that out in case anybody else runs into it. We're going to do a parse JSON action here and then just paste in our example. So we're going to deal with the content in a second. I'm going to go to the schema section where it says use sample payload to generate schema and click on that and then paste in our example. Not that you can read this. I can't make the box any bigger. That's very useful. If anybody at Microsoft happens to see this video, please make this box bigger or make a little clicky draggy thingy here. Thanks. I'm going to click on done and it generates a schema for us down here. You're going to want to go through and make sure that these look right. So make sure that your number fields are integers and so on and so forth. I guess we're going to see what happens when I make a Boolean type field and try and put it into a string choice column in SharePoint. So now we need to give it the content that it is applying the schema to. So here's the thing, the JSON that we want is nested in the body response. There can be multiple messages in these outputs. So we need to get the first message that's returned from the LLM and then take that text response, make it into JSON, and then feed it to this. So we're going to do that with an expression. I use the FX button. I'm going to do JSON. So the LLM is outputting JSON, but it's a string right now. We need to force Power Automate to realize it's JSON. And then we want to get the first. Then I'm going to type in the reference to the text response from the LLM here. I'm going to type it in instead of inserting it because we need to reference something that's nested. And so it doesn't automatically recognize what's going on with that. So we're going to do body and then give it the name of the HTTP action. So mine was still called HTTP. If you renamed yours something else, you're going to want to use your action name with the spaces replaced with underscores here. So it's in single quotes, HTTP, and then move outside of those quotes and outside of the body parentheses, we're going to do a question mark and square brackets and then content in single quotes. So this is the content of the response. Oops, I forgot my single quotes. Content. Then go outside your square brackets and then do another question mark and square brackets and the word text in single quotes. Okay, I'm going to put this expression in the blog post too, so you can copy and paste if you want to, because I'm not even sure if I typed it in right. We're going to click on add. So what this parse JSON does for us is it gives us dynamic content cards with all of those fields in the output. So now we want to use those to update the file properties. So we're going to add an action for update file properties, this one here. Update the file properties, not the file itself, and select our site again. So you might notice that this one says ID here, and it says unique identifier of the item to be updated. This one uses the ID. The get file action used the identifier. This one is using the ID and calling it the identifier. I know that's confusing. So just look for the ID. When a file is created, properties only, list item ID. So this is the ID we want here. So file content uses the identifier, file properties uses the ID, and they're not the same thing. So then our advanced parameters here, you need to click on show all to see all your fields. So click on that, get all of your fields in here. And now we need to drop in the cards from our parse JSON. So click on the little lightning bolt, and then you should see them all in here. You need to click on see more to see all of them. So make sure to expand it. Don't want anybody saying they can't see their cards. If for whatever reason you still don't see it after you click on see more, it's probably an issue with your parse JSON schema. So check that. I'm going to go through and insert the correct item that is associated with each one of these fields. And we're going to stop when we get to tags because tags is handled a little bit differently. For choice fields, you're going to want to click the drop down and then click on enter custom value here and then insert the card. Like I named some of these a little bit funky, but you get the idea. So media type here is always going to be image because it's in the image branch, right? So we can just insert that. So I want to talk a little bit about image tags here. So image tags, I think, is some part of SharePoint Premium. It just kind of appeared for me after I created the library. So when I uploaded, for example, this file, when I look at the Power Automate run history, it thinks this is a picture of a website. So it puts that in an image tag. The tagging is not very detailed and it doesn't seem to like see as well as a typical LLM will. But I do want to point out it exists because it will come up, I'm sure, in the comments. So image tags is a different thing. Our tags that we want to do are over here. So these ones, you want to click on this little T icon that says switch to input entire array. And then in the box, drop in your card for your tags. That's this one here that came out of our parse JSON. What that's going to do is going to take the JSON in the response and add a tag for each one to your item. Oops, I forgot the language here. Do language. And the AI model. So this is something we can reference from the output of the step. We can get that with an expression. So the FX button, and we're going to do body, HTTP in single quotes, or whatever you called your API call action. And then go outside the parentheses and do a question mark, square brackets, and then model in single quotes. This expression will reference the model in the output for that action. We can attach that to the file. All right, save and test this. Since we ran this earlier, we can use a recently used trigger from the one that we just have a bunch of failures in here from earlier when I had the wrong site name selected in my dropdown, but let's test it. So it ran successfully. If your flow fails, go to the step that had the issue, click on it, and look at the error message and try and troubleshoot from there, okay? It is fairly rare for Power Automate flows to run successfully the first time. You almost always have to do some troubleshooting. It just kind of comes with the territory. Let's go check our file and make sure that worked. So here's our file. You can see all the tags are here, that the model that it used, which was latest, but this is the actual model number, got attached to the file along with the rest of our metadata. So that's how to use an API to return JSON and then reattach it to the file with Power Automate. This is one of my favorite ways to use AI in Microsoft 365. I feel like it gives more control than something like, say, a chatbot or an agent. It's pretty cool. Anyways, thanks for watching and I hope you have a great day.